It's a beautifully evocative sound, the harp. It actually really lends itself well to my music, I feel.
Hi, Chloe. How are you doing today?
Oh, very well, thank you very much. And yourself?
Not too bad. Where are you connecting to with us?
So I'm just outside of Glasgow, an hour west on the coast in Wednesday, in the west coast of Scotland.
Lovely. We actually have talked to quite a lot of harpists in the area. Not a lot of them sing and play. So I'm very excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for connecting with us. Tell us about your music journey and how did the harp came into the picture?
Yeah, so a lot of people say that the harp is quite an unusual instrument to play, but I actually grew up in Edinburgh, and there it's not that much of an uncommon instrument to play. Lots of people learn it basically down to Isabel Mears, who's more or less the oracle of lever harp playing in Scotland. So I kind of learned to play it as a kid, but very relaxed kind of upbringing. I just did it for fun. And really singing was the main thing that I liked doing. So as a teenager, I was starting to do some touring and singing a lot of folk music with Lauren McCall and Ewan McPherson at the time. And we had this kind of trio band going on. But I also felt like it was quite difficult to make a living out of music and to buy harps. So I ended up looking at alternatives to go and make a living elsewhere, and something that could potentially lend itself, well, it would give me time that I could also do music. So I essentially stopped doing music altogether, and I went to sea in the Merchant Navy. So I signed up for a cadetship. And they actually sold it to me. Careers at Sea website said that you get 6 months a year off, which is true. And I thought, well, that's great. That'll give me loads of time to do music. But the reality is that you actually never really know when you have to join ship. It could be at the last minute. So I think to really take your music seriously, you need to be able to commit months in advance to gigs. So really, for about 6 to 7 years, all of my music got put on hold, and then some more years. Then I basically came back to music during my maternity leave because it gave me some time and I was on shore. But all of the time that I was at sea, I was writing music. So I had maybe about 4 jotters of music that I'd written, basically inspired by the views of the natural world at sea. I like to think of it as telling the story of modern day seafarers, because I think there's a lot of emphasis is on sea shanties when you think of maritime folk music. It's also about men at sea on sailing vessels, which isn't really relevant anymore. So my idea was to well, not really my idea, but what it's turned into was that as a creative outlet, I wrote these songs at sea, and it essentially tells the viewpoint of a female seafarer, talking about her time at sea and the difficulties, the isolation, and also the phenomenal beauty of the sea and being away from land and completely isolated. So it's quite a reflective, a lot of the tunes that I've written, and I decided to start putting them to harp music on my leave, and then that was kind of a challenge in itself, because it's one thing to kind of play the harp and then it's another to learn how to sing with it. And I'm not really from a very musical background. My family don't really play, so it took a while to build up my confidence, but at the end of the day, the songs are my message essentially. And the harp is a backdrop, and it's a beautifully evocative sound, the harp. It actually really lends itself well to my music, I feel. During that musical journey, I realized that I had enough for an album, and I also had some savings put by. So I thought, well, a nice legacy for my daughter would be to make this music into an album for her, essentially. I had stopped going to sea at that time, and I felt that she needed to see in her early days that motherhood didn't put my life on hold, and like I was still doing stuff. So I decided to put this album together, and I met someone it's actually Brian McDonald from the McDonald Brothers, down in Ayrshire. Now they were actually made quite famous back in, I think it was 2010, because they won the X Factor in the UK. So I actually didn't know this at the time, but they were actually, that's kind of what launched his career as a Celtic artist. And then he's now sidestepped into production. And we worked together on this album, and we managed to integrate lots of field recordings of the natural world and being at sea. So I've got things on this album. It's an 8-track album, and it's got things like the sea, the sound of ships. It's also got whale song, and it's got seabirds as well.
Oh my goodness. Okay, there's lots to unpack there. I need to ask you some follow-up questions. First of all, why going to the sea? That doesn't seem to me a very usual profession choice. And I imagine when you joined the industry, there's probably not a lot of women in there, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was in an intake of 80 men, all boys, they were teenagers. So and it was me. So it was one girl in 80, and the intake before me, I think it was 5 girls to 80. So I was a bit unlucky with my intake. It was particularly quiet on the female front. But I think it just looked really amazing seeing things like oil tankers come and go from the shore. And I know that a lot of people, when they go to sea, they mistake the merchant navy for the military, because obviously there's the Royal Navy, and that's what is kind of in the forefront of people's minds. I didn't really want to be anything to do with the military. For me personally, it wasn't really the path I wanted to take. The merchant navy had roots into things like pilotage, so shoreside jobs where you're manoeuvring vessels. And where my mother's from, in southwest Wales, Pembrokeshire, there's actually not that many jobs there. And so my idea was to eventually move down to Wales and enjoy the beautiful beaches there. But I really wanted to have a job that would keep me going down there. So I always thought that I would end up moving back to Wales and working in the Port Authority. Another dream I had was eventually working for a ferry company local to the west coast of Scotland, that goes out to the Hebrides and things. So it was either those two routes. I chose the Scottish route, so I am actually working for the Scottish ferry company. So it was kind of, I was looking into the future and thinking what would secure my future if I'm going to invest my time, because a lot of people, they get degrees, and I think the honours degree is really worthwhile, but then lots of people are graduating without jobs, whereas things like cadetships or apprenticeships, you get paid as you learn, and then also you are guaranteed a job at the end of it. Not to mention that you get to see the world and also life from a completely different aspect. I just thought that it would be a bit of an adventure to go to sea and do something that my family hadn't done before. So that's why it appeals to me.
Yeah. And being on oil tankers is a very different experience than being on, say, a passenger ship. And how has that spending time at sea in a very different setting shape your music or influence the way that you are as a musician?
Yeah, so it's actually had a really profound impact being at sea on oil tankers, on how my music is shaped. I almost like to think of it as, you're a young thing and you've got all this creative energy, you don't really know how to direct it. And it was almost like a piece of sea glass that needs to kind of be worn down by being at sea, to then be able to have something that is a bit more polished, and what you want to do with it. You can put it into an end product. So being at sea kind of gave me like a lot of focus and discipline, and also working on the small oil tankers. They were only 80 meters in length, so and we were operating mostly around Northern Europe, so off the coast of the UK, all around Scotland, up and down the west coast of Ireland. The weather at times is really horrendous, so you're on these tiny vessels getting completely rolled around, at one point I was sure I was going to go bald on the back of my head, because you're rolling around in your bed. You're just thinking, I'm not getting sleep, and there's so much wear and tear on your head that you're just thinking, why, how is my hair staying? But then basically all of that kind of got put into these songs. It's really kind of shaped seeing recognizable places from sea. So it was particularly interesting sailing back onto the Firth of Forth as a cadet on these tiny oil tankers, and coming underneath the Forth Road Bridge and the rail bridge, and seeing Edinburgh where I'd grown up. But obviously I was from sea, and I'd been on this massive journey all around Northern Europe and then back to Edinburgh, and it just gives you a different perspective. So the title track of the album actually is Small Voyages, and it's all about that. It's all about seeing the land from a completely different aspect from sea that you wouldn't get to see if you were on shore.
Small voyages that take a night and day, rocking around as you underway, not noticing the months you'll be away, struggling on the padlet firth, trying to keep your course. Oh, small voyages.
And how have it been to be a harpist, writing music, and surrounded by a lot of men? Like, how did your colleague react to this?
Actually, you know, I think in general, like both at sea and on shore, there's a lot of idea about judging books by the cover. So I feel that it sounds silly, but just being a woman at sea that takes an interest in the way they look and the way they dress, and I think that is something that you kind of need to hide a bit when you're actually at sea, because there's a risk of not being taken seriously. So you know, when you're in a boiler suit and a hard hat and you're just doing the job like everyone else, you tend to just talk about the work. And if you sound like you've got your head in the clouds too much writing music and playing the harp, I don't think that that's a great a great thing to share with people, and it wouldn't give me professional kudos at all. So it's something that I've kept, you know, a huge, completely compartmentalized my life basically. And although at times I've traveled on board with my harp onto the vessels, you know, there's times of the day that you can smuggle your harp on the ship without people seeing. So only a few people might spot you. So I basically just kept it a secret, really, and it's not something that I openly speak about that much with people that I'm on board ship with.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you found a way to sort of blend the two together and write about your experience in on the boats in your music. I think that is such a good way to bring all the different aspects of your life together. And not to mention, I think this will be a great album for your daughter to look back to. So let's talk about this album. How was it like for you to make an album? It's a lot of work. It's no small feat. What was the process like for you? Did it take you a long time to come up with a collection of music that you were happy with?
Yeah, so I mean, it took a long time in the sense that I've been writing the songs for a long time, but then the good thing was that I didn't write it with any pressure of deadlines or that I needed to write it for the album. So when I had the notion that I could put an album together, I could just pick and choose my favorite songs from what I'd written. And from that, I then decided, you know, 8 tracks would be a good number. I had to really juggle it with time around my daughter, because each track took a full day in the studio, so that's 8 days away from my daughter, which probably doesn't sound like that much, but for me it was actually quite a big commitment to give up that time away from my daughter. I didn't want to do it all at once. So I've got a friend called Siggy Campbell, who's got an amazing studio, and he's an amazing musician up in Inverness, or is it a bit further north? And that was ideally where I was going to, well, my first choice before I'd met Brian McDonald. But the reality was that I couldn't travel up to there to do it. And actually the accommodation that's attached to the studio, he told me wasn't, baby friendly, so there was going to be risks about her hurting herself if I took her up. So being a breastfeeding mom at the time of recording was something that I really had to factor in how I was going to get around this in a practical sense, and also an emotional sense, because I felt I was more clingy to the baby than she was to me. So the idea of leaving her made me very stressed. So I just did it in kind of, I think it was once a month was the idea, and then it turned into once a month over the first 3 months, and then I kind of squashed it all in so I could do it in time for deadlines that were coming up this year. So it took it logistically a lot of toing and froing about dates and things, and then getting into the studio. Obviously, when I'm performing and I'm practicing in the house, I play to my own rhythm. I know when I'm going to sing, when I'm going to take breaths, so the harp follows me. But of course, when you're recording, you're laying down the harp first, and that was one of the biggest challenges for me, was not having free time. I had to occasionally, some of the tracks we've used click tracks to try and get overlays with the harp, like layer it up and things. So it's been a bit of a learning curve for me, and it certainly got easier over as I experienced how to do it over the 8 tracks. So yeah, it's been really good.
And what are some of the favorite tracks in this album? I mean, it's probably going to be hard for you to pick a favorite, but if you have to pick one for someone who is just new to your music, which one would be a good gateway song into your music?
I think Frozen World is one of my favorite in hindsight. It's actually quite a difficult track for me to play, so listening back to it is a really nice experience, because I can actually appreciate how it all comes together.
Once upon a time a nice descended, it fell upon the world. The world was covered after a hurling wind. The world was smothered, this beautiful world of mine. Now all around me icicles dry.
And I think when you're a performer, it's really hard to reflect on your music and know how it's coming across when you've written something. So Frozen World is one of my favorite tracks, and Arctic Turns. And I wrote both of these songs off the back of traveling around, sailing around Alaska. So they're really inspired by getting up close to seeing things like glaciers calving, and bears and ice floats and all sorts of stuff that we saw that was amazing during scenic cruising in Alaska. And Arctic Turns, that's actually got the seabird's song in it. And what's interesting about that is that I wrote that thinking and thought, oh, well, I'll put the bird song in, because people do that with music, they put bird song in. And I had written the song about a bird that has a very ugly call. So I listened to the tracks of the field recordings, and it's all very like a seagull, and I wasn't sure how that was going to work. So I think that's also quite a good track to listen to, because it does somehow work. Brian McDonald's has kind of produced it so that it's blended in very nicely. And also Frozen World has got field recordings of glaciers calving, because that's quite a big part of the song, or the inspiration for it. Also, Arctic Turns is written about long distance relationships. So I don't know if we've got anyone following this that actually is into bird watching, but they would know that it's a bird that migrates the furthest amount of distance of all migratory birds. So sometimes they can travel from pole to pole. So you might see these birds anywhere really. And what's romantic about them, and what caught my imagination when I saw them from the bridge of my ship, was that they keep one mate for life. So once they meet a seabird, they meet up once a year, and then they fly around the different directions, and they meet up in the same place every year and have a nest together. And that is actually one way that my husband and I kept in touch whilst we were doing long distance at sea, because he's in the Royal Navy. One way we kept in touch was to look out the window on our navigational watches and see what wildlife was out there, and make a note of it, and then basically email each other, because often we didn't have signal for phone calls, or we were on watch at different times. So we'd pick up these emails about natural phenomenon, or seabirds that we'd seen at sea, whales and things. And it was a great way to feel connected, because at the end of the day, you're both at sea and you don't see each other for months or longer. And then you have this sense of continuity by seeing almost, you could essentially see the same types of wildlife at sea. So that was really probably me being very romantic and missing my husband when I wrote that song.
That's special. I love it.
You and I will begin. You and I will begin. Where the Arctic tern goes, where the Arctic tern goes. You and I will begin. You and I, you and I.
I always enjoy hearing what inspired people to write about a certain thing or create a piece of music or art about a certain thing, and that's probably one of the most sweetest stories I've heard. That's lovely. And you have quite a lot of gigs booked up to promote your album, and I think your album launch is going to happen sometime in September as well, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've got actually quite a few key dates over the next few months. So I'm working with a promoter who's keeping me right, and we're actually releasing my next single. We released the first single, Clyde Islands, in June, and that's been really well received and gotten, I'm surprised, quite a bit of radio play.
By the tide and filled with emotion, as the river coming white flows out to sea, watching the water flow into the ocean, the river's coming never-ending stream.
And then we're releasing Catching a Free Ride.
Life with you is like catching a free ride.
And then Small Voyages in September, followed by the actual album Small Voyages on the 16th of September. So there's kind of a countdown to try and drum up interest and tell people that something's happening. And then the album will be available on all streaming platforms, and it's also going to be available on hard copies directly from myself through Bandcamp, and also through Burnham CD's CD shop. So if you want to have a hard copy, you can either message me. You know, I do pick up messages on social media, so you can just message me if you're interested. And you can also actually pre-order it just now, along with pre-ordering the singles as well.
Awesome. I'm all for the hard copy, so I'm signing myself up for a hard copy. Great.
Thank you.
And where can we find your gig schedule?
Oh yeah, so I'm on. I've listed it various places, including my website, and then I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So if you want to follow me on all of those channels.
That's awesome. Okay, so what are you gonna do now that you're gonna have your first album, and I think you have some really good things to offer. So I would love to know where you want to take your music in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so I've actually started writing. Well, it's like the songs just keep coming, and I sometimes don't have time to, to write them all down. So I've got a backlog of songs that I really need to give my attention. And so my next plan after the album is released and is out, and I'm doing the tour, and that's behind me, into 2023. I'm hoping to release a series of singles culminating in a small album of maybe 4 or 5 songs. So that's kind of into next year. I'm also potentially doing thinking about going outside of the UK. I've been really pleased with the reception of my music in the UK gig-wise, so I've actually started picking up, getting booked up for gigs up until November. I'm quite busy doing a couple a month, which is all I have time to commit to be honest. So I have to stagger it a bit because I also work full time, and I'm also obviously a mum as well. And then I want to then do a tour, thinking about going abroad as well. So maybe Denmark and Germany is the next kind of stop for me. I was quite excited because one of my tracks from the album has been included in the Fateh showcase, which is organised by a kind of blog and radio station that's located in Canada and also Australia. So they broadcast globally, and every 3 months they compile a compilation of 16 artists, and they actually have all of their music for free from the website. I'll be posting that link online, and I'll share that with you as well, because actually that means that you can get a free track from the album and see if you like the sound of it. And essentially they do that to help promote artists, and the idea is that if you like the music, you can go on, either order the album, start talking about it and sharing it with your friends. And the track that I'm sharing with Fateh and that you'd get for free if you wanted to download this is actually Frozen World, which I've already spoken about. So I think that's quite exciting, the fact that you are sitting in Scotland recording it and you don't think that it's going to go anywhere really. You have hopes, of course, that people might listen to it, but as soon as radio stations, I think there was also a radio station in Hawaii recently, and Turkey, and France and Germany that I know of that played the song, and that's really exciting for me as starting out, just thinking that, you know, I hadn't really thought, like I thought maybe in the UK some people might listen to it, but the idea of it going around the world and reaching people that I've never met is quite exciting for me.
It is very exciting, and really that's has really opened up for myself music possibilities that I didn't even know exist in the past, and I'm really grateful to be connected to you through Talking Harps and learn about your music. Now, I have something I want to ask you, because I was perusing your Instagram before I come to talk to you as I was preparing. You have alpacas. Have you played music to them? Do they love the harp? Tell me, because I have a little soft spot for alpacas myself.
Yeah, so yeah, talking about being busy, I also run a small alpaca trekking business, which is just outside of Glasgow, and we've got 5 alpacas, and I would say that they're actually very calm, and they love to hum to each other, and it's almost like they are, like in their nature, instinctively musical, because they communicate by humming to each other. So of course, being a harpist, I couldn't resist, like you say, to bring my harp to the fields and play to them. And they are such curious, inquisitive animals. They come around you and they essentially hum with you. So you can, I have played with them. I haven't got it on camera yet, but I want to go up with maybe a camera and hopefully pick up the sounds of them humming and having this alpaca chorus all standing around me while I'm playing the harp, because they really do enjoy it.
Oh, that would be awesome. I'm gonna post a link to your Instagram, Facebook, and all your other social media, as well as the Fateh link that you're gonna send me so that our audience can check out your track. And of course, you're on Bandcamp as well, which I am a big fan of. So your music will be available through Bandcamp and everywhere else. Just look at the video description. We're gonna have all the links there for you. That's
Brilliant.
awesome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity of connecting with you and learning about what you do. I'm so excited for your new album. This seems to be the time that a lot of my guests who are talking to are launching their album, and it's such an exciting time for me to be able to collect some physical CDs. I feel like I've been deprived of it in the last 2 years. Not a lot of music has came out, so I'm so happy to see that everyone is releasing their music, going to gigs, and sharing their music with everyone, not just in the people around them, but also around the world, which is, like you said, it's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best with your album launch, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much.